Thanks for that talk as well, John. Just to finish on a positive note, doing something. One of the things I found really fascinating was salmon gold. So the gold that was recovered had an environmental credit, if you like, which they could turn into a financial credit. This is the problem for the nickel industry at the moment. The copper industry has a thing called the copper mark. About 30% of copper is now accredited with the copper mark because the mines producing it meet certain ESG type criteria, and they need to prove that, and they'll get the copper mark. If something happened like that in copper, then there's a differentiator in the market. Nickel, obviously not. So at the moment, if people buying their EVs knew that the nickel in their battery, if they're using it, came from the destruction of rainforests in Indonesia, raping and pillaging of rainforests in Indonesia, and the subsequent processing of that, which is also not a very nice story, would they pay more for a battery that didn't involve that, right? And I find that a really fascinating question. People will pay more to pay for a supply chain that they're happy with, but you need to explain it and articulate it very, very well. Otherwise, they will not. The nickel industry, because it was so blindsided, I think are completely caught, use the euphemism, with their pants down. Anyway, okay, now it's time for the Lynda and Dave show, and I think this is an idea that Lynda came up with when we were talking about this session and talking within this session. I just want to say something at the start about Lynda. You heard Lynda's CV from Gervais earlier on, but something that Lynda does in the industry, which I don't think she gets a lot of credit for, actually, not obvious credit. We spoke about Global already starting, 20 years ago now, and for that time, Global employed many female scientists and staff in the company. More than 50%, actually, going back 15, 18 years, more than 50% of our staff are female. So they could deal with each other, or they had to deal with two grumpy, well, not as old, but blokes, myself and Steve Winter in the company. But, in the background, Lynda was working with a lot of our female staff, and some of them are here today, actually, and mentoring them, helping them, taking questions. I believe in some instances how to deal with Dave, perhaps, when you join him at PDAC and you're out drinking and things like that. But I think that, and that's not just Global, right? Lynda has done that work with many women or female technical people in this industry for an extremely long time. And I think the industry is incredibly lucky to have attracted someone like Lynda in the first place into this industry, because I do believe it was a close run thing. And for many reasons. But Lynda, I would like to ask you about this photo and for you to give us some
So this was not my first choice for the first, I only have a few slides I put together. This was not my first choice, but it does sort of speak to the came close on the geology thing. So the person in the middle is me at field school. And my point is the guys on either side were the cute guys. And so people will say to me, how did you get into geology? And I'll say, I didn't know geology was a thing. Grew up in Ottawa. Well, we did have lots of good rocks in the Gatineau Hills. But I had nobody in my life who had ever talked to me about a rock. And I started off, I did honors math, then I did honors chem. And somebody said, the cute guys said, geology is, I needed another science credit. It's a bird course, So I was taking hardcore chemistry and physics, and I went, oh, this is great. Worst mark ever at midterms. Apparently you did still need to study. Who knew? And then we had field school, right? And everybody loves field school. I mean, who did field school? Okay, who loved it? How many people got more than 6 hours a night sleep? We loved it, right? And it just, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe every first year science, university science person should have the opportunity to do field school, and they'd all be geologists. That's my current theory.
Can I say something about field schools? I obviously did them as well and used to run them for a while. But my son, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree sometimes. But my son in second year of geology at UWA, University of Western Australia, went on his first field school a couple of years ago. And we're both males, we don't talk to each other much around the house, just that's how it works. But I was out boozing somewhere in Perth, got home at 10 o'clock, but he stayed up after he got back on the Friday, waiting for me to get home to tell me about the field school. And he talked non-stop for 3 hours, right? Not one word mention of rocks, right? It was all about everything else that happened on the school. And the two highlights were him and his mate getting in the tent and zipping it up and then finding a very large orb spider in the tent, which is a fairly classical thing in Australia at least. And then the other student who they were allowed to drink, which thank goodness I thought these days maybe you're not allowed to drink on field schools, but apparently you still are, thank goodness. But one of the students stored up and sequestered his beer allowance for the entire trip and then drank it all on the bus on the way back to the university. And this is sort of a 6 or 7 hour drive on the bus from the middle of WA back to Perth. And then as the bus was pulling into the car park, threw up all over the place. And I thought, thank goodness, right? It's things haven't changed that much in the last 30 years. And they will be experiences that they will all remember for the rest of their lives. And maybe not quite then, but with great pleasure, maybe not pleasure later on. Now, Lynda, I'm going to skip back.
And I think the other thing that sort of comes up is I think we want to talk a little bit about the humanity gap.
Yes.
How are we going to find the human resources to do all these wonderful things that John needs us to do? And we think it just feels everybody hates us, right? I mean, just how we can't attract young people. And everything in the news is just, you're a horrible person. I mean, usually if somebody meets me and says, oh, you're a geologist, they think maybe I'm digging up bones. They think I'm an archaeologist. But when we sort that out, very few people actually attack me personally for destroying the environment, but maybe that's just the people I hang out with. And this is, you can hardly see, but this is just, you can look it up. 2022 Mining Association of Canada survey. And really it says that more like 80% of, this is just Canadians, 80% of people do at least find mining acceptable. And it's that 10 to 15%, these are all just subdivided questions, that find that the mining industry's activities are poor. Like, they're what was interesting is when I started the Public Affairs Committee for the PDAC, and we had Angus Reid do a survey, we asked the questions about exploration versus mining. And exploration has almost a 90 to 95% acceptance rate. And I don't know if that's historically, because we all know our history is about prospecting and Yukon, but the responses were less favorable if you talked about mining. So people didn't quite get that the process of doing exploration is to find a mine. They were willing to separate out those two things.
Which has its own issues, of course, with the general level of understanding, and which leads to the other problem we have that my phone's over there, but people don't equate with what we do with having a phone in their hand, let alone a kitchen bench and a car to drive home in, which sounds really stupid and trivial, but it's not. Actually, when we are resource constrained and trying to find and develop new materials for industrialisation and continued growth. There was another survey, a bit like this one, but it compared working in minerals or mining, metalliferous mining and ferrous mining, to every other category that you could work in, basically. And that was a global study, and mining came in last, even below working in oil and gas for young people, right? Which was, I was shattered when I saw that.
But that's not fair. So I was recently at a mine site, and there's a young woman who's the surveyor, and she's all geared up. She's going into the open pit. She's going to be doing her survey, and because I know I'm coming here, I'm sort of interested. I don't think she was mid-20s. I said, so how are you finding it, and what were you doing before? She said, well, I was a surveyor on highways. And I said, well, what do you think the big difference is? She says, this is so much safer. Mining's safer. But compared to standing on the side of the highway, on the 400 series highways in Ontario, she was a lot safer. And, it's this whole misconception. It's also the, we're destroyers of the environment. Go back to Sudbury. So Sudbury was a wasteland, and we can tie that back into nickel, right? So, there was I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who said, oh, I went to Sudbury, and it looks great. It's all green. Because if you went to Sudbury in the 70s, because of acid rain and all that stuff, it was a wasteland, total wasteland. But we don't tell the good stories about our industry. We're not good at the communication, and we get, it's those... the people who the haters that get heard, and because they make better news, right? Good news stories it's a media thing. It's a media bias thing.
Yep. And I think on that front, our own industry is not very good at this period, but also presenting a united voice around this issue. So some of them have a crack individually trying to educate the community around what they do, but they find it very hard to get past everything's mined and farmed. And sorry, that doesn't cut it with young people anymore as a marketing message, despite it being true. I think they really do need to think about something differently, which is I really liked that video I showed, because that is an entirely different way to go about delivering a message, and it uses music, right? It's not, our industry itself would never have dreamt that up.
Not entirely true. I do know guys who have been trying to do the music thing for a while, but the idea Peter Gummer had in Saskatoon a long time ago was to have a competition, right, for who could write the best rock song to promote mining. It didn't actually go very far. And this is a really old photo from the 1980s, which was a horror story of artisanal miners at this gold open pit. And just sort of, we get very focused on what we feel is happening we know is happening in Australia and North America, but it's a big world, and all of our metals don't come from our immediate backyard. There's a lot happening overseas. How many of you have worked on overseas projects? Right. We aren't, and things are, I think we've done a better job of engaging, most of the time, locals. And so we don't fly in, partially it was costs, right? Trying to reduce the cost of expats on mine sites. But, local, I'm thinking Africa, a lot more people have had access to geology degrees and mining engineering degrees. And they're often in quite very senior positions, right? So, and this is a little bit out the side of your mouth that 45 million artisanal small-scale miners operate worldwide. And there's lots of issues around artisanal mining. The point is just not everybody hates us. What's interesting is the numbers that they talk about is 30% are women, and we could do better with our statistic for women in our industry, which is considerably safer, less environmentally impactful, et cetera. What's interesting is, every time I go to a conference or sit in a meeting like this, I count the number of women. And usually it's, a lot of the time it's been less than 10%, which I found interesting because when I graduated, there were 50% women in my class. It was a small class at Carleton University, but it was almost 50% women, and has been 50% women for a long time, but just doesn't seem to translate. This group is 25% women, which I think is remarkable, just from my head count.
You did the head count.
I always do the head count.
Yeah. The artisanal mining is so 30% of women, which is also interesting. But what about the story if you're dealing with working with the Turkish women in mining and geology?
And this is so because I've had the opportunity to work worldwide, and often dealing with laboratories, and quite often, probably because it's the least, the lowest salaries and the lowest on the totem pole in the, am I allowed to say that? Yes. In the on the mine site. Anyways, there's a lot of women.
Yes.
And so, like Russia was amazing. All the labs are run by women. The only man in the building was the boss, and he was always off drinking vodka for lunch. So I've had this opportunity to work with all these women, and so that recently has started to translate. So I was contacted by several women geologists out of Turkey, and they want to start their own Women in Mining Association. And how should we go about it? And I mean, we did this, in the 80s, I started SWIG, Saskatchewan Women in Geology. And it's sort of gotten more formal since then. But there's International Women in Mining, there's Women in Mining Canada, there's Women in Geoscience. There are these organizations, and they try to engage with industry to advance the theory that you could have a higher percentage of women. I mean, BHP's really anomalous in saying that they wanted 50% women 50% women employees.
Yeah. I noticed just after COVID, actually, so resuming traveling around the world after COVID and visiting companies, there was a material change actually in the number of women in the meetings and the sorts of roles they had. It was very noticeable. I don't know what to put that down to. Maybe some of the old white guys just retiring during COVID, had a gutful and left during that period, but were replaced by women coming through the system but they're already in the system to be there. But they're just going up through the ranks. But it was very noticeable and just good.
So one of the ones last year that was really remarkable for me is I'm on a video call at a mine site, and it's the geology manager for, I think she was the not just the resource geologist, she was responsible for the whole geology department, a couple of senior underground geologists, and the lab manager, all women.
Yeah.
Do you know how much of a change that is from, I don't know, I think even 10 years ago, but I mean, 20 years ago, I never interacted with another woman on a business. I mean, I don't know. And sort of this is the positive side of the message. Change is possible.
Yes.
I think a lot of old white men did have to decide to move on to make room. I think that's, and I think just if we could do the next slide.
Presentation at PDAC, I was looking at the audience pre-COVID, talking about technology adoption in the industry. A room full of Canadians were very polite, but I told the room that half of you would have to die and then we would make progress. But
so along those lines, so I used to go to the CIM Toronto branch luncheon, which was in the very high-end Royal York Hotel. 300 people for lunch, and they were all old white men in blue suits. I mean, in King and Bay. I mean, and I was at the back going, okay, you all have to die for me to get a good job. I mean, maybe that's a little sick, but that's just sort of how it felt at the time. So this is really the same thing as the kind of thing that you already showed, the relative size of the mining market. I usually compare it to perfume. And because I'm going, do we need perfume? But we need nickel. So it just, and people are very familiar with perfume and they don't know where their nickel comes from. I would say people like I'm going to talk a little, hopefully have time to talk a little bit about the PDAC Mining Matters. And they do a thing for school kids about where do all the parts of your cell phone come from.
Oh, perfect.
Right, so that's the sort of messaging you were trying to find. We can just do the next one. I really believe that one of the problems is these things are long cycle, including getting permits for mines, etc. So this is talking about the commodity cycle from 1993 to 2018, so about 25 years. And by 1993, I was trying to develop my career, and I was 30-something, and I was looking for where could I go with this stupid mining industry? And the answer was nowhere. It wasn't just gold prices trashed. All the base metals trashed, uranium trashed, and almost everybody I'd gone to school with had to earn a living, and so they did something else. Somebody was selling shoes. I ran into a guy, knocked on the door of the office, and he was selling boxes of frozen chicken breasts. And I went, oh yeah, I don't really want chicken breasts. And then it turns out he was in my class at Carleton. I bought a box of chicken breasts, but because they're for the grace of God, go I. It just so. We're missing all those people.
Yes.
Right? And so in the 1990s, when I was trying to run junior mining companies, they weren't there. And so actually there were Danish geologists I had to fly in, Johan, fly in to help run projects. And luckily he stayed in Canada and has added immeasurably to our economy. Point is, this does happen. And unfortunately, geologists really need to take this sort of thing into account when planning their careers.
We're going to get the long hook and dragged off. So just finishing off about the students, Lynda, you asked me a question, is the situation in Australia as dire as the situation in Canada for enrolments in not just geoscience, mining as well? The answer is yes. The other thing that really annoys me is talking to my comrades and working in various universities in Europe. They have money thrown at them left, right and centre. They can have no trouble at all getting money to get the newest machine that goes ping, get postdocs, do lots of really interesting work. My God, in Australia, in the research community, that is like pulling teeth. It is just really, really diabolical. So, we're not reaping the sods that we never ever seeds that we sowed now, and we do pay for it a bit now. With our VOI project, we're trying to find postdocs and students to work in that, and Cassidy's up there, she might give it a plug as well. It's not easy to find skilled people to, just to do this research for us now.
I'm going to take 5 seconds, honest, 5 seconds, because I want to say that also on the positive side of things, there are people trying to, continuing to try and attract young people. I want to again talk about Mining Matters, which is the program of the cooperation with the PDAC. It's been going for about 10 years. They estimate that they've reached 825,000 teachers, students, and members of the public, actually since they started in 1994, and their budget is $1.3 million annually. It is not insignificant, and a really good role model for many other kinds of systems. We also, when I was at the PDAC, I started the Student Industry Mineral Exploration Workshop in 2007. It brings students from across Canada together, unfortunately in Sudbury. Well, I mean, it wasn't supposed to always be Sudbury, but it's always in Sudbury. Just to encourage them to maintain their geology career, and it bridges the gap. It's to meet industry and see what really happens. This is the what happens. You could do an academic career, but you never actually see a drill rig. So those are sorts of things. I participated in high school job fairs. Now I do things as mundane as lead geology hikes on the Bruce Trail. But I think it's really important that if we want to sustain this industry with the people, is each and every person has to take some action. And you can go to a job fair, you can go talk to a grade school class, whether or not you have children in that school. You can act as a mentor, which I really think is important to someone in the business. Maybe you'll have to encourage them to stay in the industry. And then I'm just going to make one more pitch, which is if you don't have time, you're all really busy, I get that, make a donation to Mining Matters. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynda.